I am so honored to speak to you on the topic of the art of self-healing, which is really the art of relationship and the art of self-love. Who doesn't like to talk about love? And you know, the old paradigm in medicine is about going to the doctor to have something fixed. The new paradigm is completely different. It's about going to a caregiver to learn about love. So how does that shift things? People are often really scared to go to the doctor. And I can tell you that physicians in general really want to have a relationship with their patients. And even though the system has broken down, I think patients have the capacity to shift that. We all do. We have that power. And especially with the chaos going on now in the field of medicine, I think the most empowered group to make the change is you. Because physicians feel very beleaguered by everything that's going on, and it's out of our control. Really, the power is back for the people. So, and all of your doctors are patients too. So one of the reasons why I wanted to share my story with you is I wanted to give you some insight into what a doctor's experience of being a patient is. And I can tell you that I share some of the same frustrations that you have in traditional medicine. And I have been so blessed to be a part of this transition in medicine. Because when I started in Rochester as a physician on my 30th birthday in 1986. It's way back there. And one of the things that impressed me about the community is what wonderful quality of care there is. And the first physician that I had in Rochester myself, most physicians here are involved in HMOs, and I noticed that, wow, what a lot of patients these physicians have here. Well, within a year of being here, I had 2,000 patients. Those were the years where there weren't that many women physicians, so everyone wanted to come to a woman physician. Within 9 months of starting my practice, I became pregnant. And in the second trimester, when I had an ultrasound, they noticed that I had a tumor, a grapefruit-sized tumor on my right ovary. And so I was also moving from our rented house in Brighton to the first home we bought. There were no phones. That was pre-cell phone era. And we didn't really know our neighbors. And my husband at the time was an intern in orthopedics, and he was really busy. So I called up my partners, and I said, I don't think I'll make it in today. And they said, oh, what's the matter? Well, like a typical physician, I said, oh, don't worry, I'll be fine. Well, by the end of that evening, it was about 7 o'clock at night, my medical partner was really worried about me. So she came and checked because she hadn't heard from me. And she said, Melanie, you look awful. I think you should go to the hospital. I said, I'll be fine. She said, will you come home with me? And I said, are you sure it wouldn't be a problem? Because she had 3 little kids. She said, no, please come. Well, that night, I proceeded to almost bleed to death. And the odd thing about it is, it was almost, I think I was having an out-of-body experience because I was so sad about the miscarriage, I didn't really want to deal with what was happening to my body. The body and the soul are actually the very same thing. Have you ever heard that before? Yeah, the body is actually precipitated soul. It's the matter of soul. So that's why my work all these years, since that time especially, has been about helping people to navigate their soul. Because that's really how we heal. Once we understand what's happening with the soul, we gain insight, deep insight into why our body's acting up. I had been healthy until about 1980, which was my second year of medical school. And in 1980, I developed some bleeding. And every medical student has to go for a physical. So I remember I went for the physical. I didn't tell the doctor that I was having bleeding. And he, of course, discovered it. And I was like 23 years old, 24 years old. He said, oh, you have to go for a colonoscopy. I said, oh, no, I don't. I don't want to go for a colonoscopy. And he said, no, really. And this was the chairman of the department, a wonderful guy, big Scottish brogue. And so I went for it, and he said, oh, you have ulcerative colitis. And I said, Dr. Craig, I don't think so. I feel fine. And he was like one of the smartest people in his field at that time. So, I thought, I guess I have to take his word for it. So he put me on prednisone, azolfidine, and a couple other things. And at the time, I was like 90 pounds dripping wet. So having to take those medicines just made me sick. So I took them for 2 weeks. And then I went back and saw him like a month later. How you doing on the medicines? Does sound familiar? And I said, well, actually, Dr. Craig, I stopped the medication. Well, you shouldn't do that. I said, why not? He said, well, because this can become cancerous. And I remember thinking, how did I go from a little bit of rectal bleeding to having cancer so quickly? And he was so serious. And I remember thinking, because I was already a meditator at that stage of my life, I tuned inside and I said, this is bull. I am not going to take this medicine. So it cleared up. I listened to the voice inside. It cleared up. And a pattern developed. Whenever I was going to go home again and visit my family in California, the bleeding started up again. So then I made a link. Wow, it's something to do with my family of origin. Right now, in those years, in 1980, nobody was really talking about mind-body medicine, but there were a few of us medical students that were interested in TM, and we were doing TM by that time. It was sort of introduced into the 70s, and Herbert Benson at Harvard was really a pioneer in the area of mind-body medicine, and I was doing a little bit of work with him. But every time I went back to the doctor for a checkup, he'd start in with the same song and dance. You need to take this medicine. And I loved him, and I'd take the prescriptions, and I'd fill them, and they'd sit in the cabinet. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Do you ever do that? So it was really troubling. And it was also really odd, because when I went home the summer between my first and second year of medical school, how's this for a metaphor? I was driving with my father to the garbage dump, because we lived out in the country. Now, they lived in a 7,000 square foot house. Don't ask me why we were driving our garbage to the dump, but we were. And he said, how are you? And I said, well, I'm fine, except I've developed an illness. And he said, well, what is it? And I said, well, they tell me I have ulcerative colitis. And he said, oh, wow, what medicine are you taking? My father was a dentist. And I told him, and I said, but I'm not actually taking it. And he said, why not? I said, well, because the reason why I have bleeding is it's your fault. And, here, I couldn't believe it came out of my mouth. I had never stood up to my father ever. In fact, I was afraid of him. So he just yelled, which was his way. He said, that's not my fault, that's your fault. And so that ended the conversation. We dumped the garbage at the dump and drove home. So when I went back to medical school that fall, the bleeding was worse. And I thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do about this? And basically, I just threw myself in my studies and ignored it. I took iron. And, those were the years where I had no money. I was putting myself through medical school. I didn't eat that well. So I was just popping iron all the time to keep my blood count up. Really a bad idea. In 1981, I started to have some insights in meditation that corresponded with these nightmares that I was having. Every night, I'd go to sleep after a long day of studying, and I'd hear a baby crying. And in the nightmare, I would see a pair of bloody hands. And I knew that I recognized the hands, And it really bothered me when I'd wake up in the middle of the night because I'd think, I know those hands, whose hands are those, and why do I keep hearing a baby crying? So, I'd get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, go back to my studies, work a long day, come back, go to sleep, same thing. So my boyfriend at the time was an engineer in California, and I shared with him what was going on. And he said, he was close friends with my family, and he said, have you talked to your parents about it? I said, I don't want to talk to them about it. And I ended up going home that Christmas and just, I went back into my room, the same room I had had as a child, and just sobbed the entire Christmas vacation. And I said to my parents, I don't know if I want to go back to medical school. And my mother said, you have to go back. My father didn't really want me to go to medical school. In fact, I'm from a very traditional Armenian American family, and in our entire family line, none of the girls went to college. They went to high school, got married, had babies, and that was it. So I was already sort of kind of a black sheep, and nobody was really that happy that I had pursued a higher education. So after a lot of prayer, I decided to go back. And I really immersed myself in the spiritual community of Chicago where I was going to medical school. I went to Northwestern. They had a really wonderful chaplain there. And I talked with her a few times about what I was feeling and how I felt that my body, that God was trying to tell me something through my body. And the year before, the Pope had made his first visit because there's so many Polish people in Chicago. So I was lucky enough to be one of a group of medical students that saw the Pope. And I remember feeling his energy go directly to this part of my body. How weird is that? And it just sort of confirmed my feelings that my symptoms, my bleeding, must have something to do with God talking to me. And this was before the time there were books like Body Talk and things like that where this was talked about a lot. But I was just convinced. And when I would see patients, I noticed the same things that I had noticed when I was a child, and that is I would know what was wrong with them before I even looked at their chart. And I found out later on, after I had been a doctor for about 5 years, that my great-great-grandmother on my mother's side was a hands-on psychic surgeon in Europe. And she traveled all over Europe healing people with her hands. She was a faith healer. And my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, and her daughter, my mother, also had gifts. But they didn't really speak about them. And so in my generation, fourth generation, what I noticed from my mom especially was, don't talk about that. So if I'd hear a voice speaking, if I heard spirit speaking to me, or I saw shapes and images that I thought was a spirit from the other side, my mother would shut it down because I think she was afraid for me. I really do. And to me, it seemed so natural. It didn't really seem like anything to be afraid of. And these spirits would come to me, particularly at night or when I was in church. And ironically enough, my father also saw spirit, and he would see auras around people, and we would talk about it. And I'd say to him, hey, Dad, do you see the colors around that person? And we'd talk about the colors. So again, this was nothing I was talking to anybody about out in the community, and certainly not in medical school. I really kept my gifts a secret. But my professors noticed them. And in those years, your professors ranged anywhere from 50 years old to, 80-something. Internists, surgeons, they tend to work a long time. And they would say, just send Melanie and they'll get better. And I remember feeling embarrassed. It's like, why did they notice me? Isn't that an odd reaction? Like, you think you would be proud of your gifts. But I felt shame. I felt shame about it. So it was a secret between the patient and I. And to be honest, that's carried through my entire career. We would have these experiences, the patient and I, with their relatives coming into the room speaking. And I'd sort of assess myself if the person would feel comfortable with me saying, your mother is in the room. Would you like to talk with her? So I didn't really know what it meant. And I didn't know why I was given this gift. And I didn't understand any of it. And I felt uncomfortable with it. So I visited my priest, what you're taught to do when you're Catholic kid. And he said, you've been blessed with spiritual gifts, and don't shut them down. Let them just be. You've had these gifts since you were a small child. God obviously is equipping you for something big. So be thankful. And that was such wonderful advice because it's carried me through my entire life. There have been times when I really have wanted to shut it down because it's felt like too much, but it isn't too much. And I really do believe the adage that God doesn't give you more than you can handle. It may seem like that's the case, but I don't think it is. So that brings us to 1981 again. And I had fallen in love with another medical student. And we were serious, and we were planning to get married. And I had my first gynecologic exam. Again, another one of my professors. Isn't that comfortable? Oh! So, and of course, Dr. Ellis was this tall, extremely handsome. I think he had been in practice 2 years, and he was excellent. He was really a good physician. And he said to me, Melanie, you've had a child. I said, no, I haven't. He said, well, then there's something really wrong. I need to take you under general anesthesia. So I called my mom, and I said, Mom, Dr. Ellis thinks I've had a child, and he thinks if I haven't had a child that I must have been abused. Well, my mother became hysterical on the phone. And she said, oh, come home and see Dr. Whitworth. That was her physician. And Dr. Whitworth was on the board of the symphony with her. So they were personal friends. So when I came home that Christmas, I saw him. And he noticed the same thing Dr. Ellis had noticed. But rather than say anything, he said to me, someday someone will love you very much, and this won't bother them. He said, it'll be all right. And we walked into his office where my mother was sitting at the desk, and my mother was hysterical. You could tell she had been crying. And she said, is everything okay? And I said, yes, Mom, everything's fine. What I had done my whole life, take care of her. And it was really interesting because after that, I told Steve, I said, Steve, I don't think I'm going to be able to have children. So there were memories coming up that I was still stuffing down. But I said, I don't think I'm going to be able to have children. Would you be okay with that? He said, oh, yeah, that's fine. As long as we're together, it doesn't matter. Well, what I had told him and what everyone knew about me is that more important to me than anything else, I thought at the time anyway, was having a baby. I was one of these kids that started babysitting when I was 11 years old. I just, to this day, love children, love babies. So the thought of not being able to have a child was very upsetting to me. The nightmares continued. I got married. Shortly after I got married, as I said, I got pregnant. Then all the memories started coming back. I was taken into the operating room with this tumor on my ovary. The doctor assured me that we wouldn't lose the baby. But upon removing the tumor, it was still a viable pregnancy, but then I lost the child. And they took me back to the operating room. And when I was waking up from anesthesia, I said to my then husband, I said, I'm never going to be able to have children, am I? And he said, yes, you will. And I remember thinking to myself, he's lying. But he wasn't, because I am the mother of 2 children that I adopted from Korea. But that began my spiritual odyssey into trying to heal this. Because what came up for me in the years to come, upon my work with Dr. Herbert Benson and Dr. Deepak Chopra, I wanted to be trained by them to become a mind-body medicine physician. And there was a meditation with the premier Ayurvedic specialist in the world, I think, Vasant Lad and Deepak Chopra. And I had gone to one of his seminars, and he had said to me, Melanie, I'd really like you to head my medical center. Meet me in Atlanta in a month, and we're going to meet with Vasant Lad and a couple of other people. And I was so honored. I thought, I can't believe he's asking me to do it. And so we did a meditation, and it was a regression type of a meditation. And when I got to the age of 12, I was stuck there. I couldn't go back any further. But what was amazing is after that meditation, my whole body was vibrating. I felt like I was vibrating at the speed of light. And I felt so joyous. I mean, that's what prayer and meditation does for you. If any of you are meditators and you stick with it, it's just so enlivening. And I went to bed that night. And on April the 1st, I woke up in the middle of the night. So the meditation was March 31st. So at like 3 in the morning, I woke up. And I remembered what had happened to me. And I called my then husband and I said, look, I have some things to tell you when I get home. And this was the first time he had babysat the children, so he was like totally agitated. And he said, just come home and be a mother, would you? And so I got home and I told him the story. And I could tell immediately that he wasn't going to be able to handle it. And he said to me that I would like to gut your father. And I said, Steve, it's not going to help to get angry at him. I need you. I need your help. He said, Melanie, I wish I would have known this had happened to you. I would have loved you more. And, you know, that really affected me to hear him say that. That has to be one of the saddest statements any of us could make. To have regret over not having loved someone more, I think it's a real eye-opener. And that's why I share it with you, is that, you know, what came out and what I shared with him is that my father was the abuser. My father had begun abusing me from the age of 3. And I remember the first time it happened. It was a cabin in Northern California, and my mother was pregnant with my brother. Right after he abused me, we went out in front of the fire. This is beautiful Northern California, redwood forest. And he threw a log on the fire, and a bunch of wasps came and stung me on the left leg. And the bartender who loved me came out and gave me a Shirley Temple and an ice pack and said, here, honey, I'll help you with this. And my mother stoically sat next to me without doing a thing. And I remember thinking, she knows. She knows he hurt me, and she's mad at me. And so from that point on, I decided I have to take care of my mother, and I have to take care of my father. That's my job. That's what good little girls do. And if I don't do that, God will punish me, because that's what they told me. Early on, the words my father would say to me when he abused me is, you have to do this, or God will punish you. So you can imagine what a stretch it is to go from hearing that for most of your life and then become this 20-something who instinctively knew, I have to pray. There's nothing else that's going to get me through this. There's no doctor that's going to be able to help me with this. They don't even know the correct diagnosis, right? Here I went through all that work after that miscarriage. Not a single person said what Dr. Ellis had told me in 1981. You've been pregnant before. And I thought to myself, I thought Rochester was such a premier physician community. What is the matter? But of course, it wasn't their fault. I wasn't ready for the information. I didn't want to deal with it. And that sort of continued, to be honest. I think the excuse I used was, I need to stay close to God. There's nothing I could do if I feel all these emotions. What I did instead is when the memory unfolded, I called my parents and I said, I just want you to know I remembered. I didn't give any details. I didn't tell them what I remembered. My mother became hysterical on the phone. My father was completely silent. And that was about it. They really didn't discuss it at all. And I thought somehow I would be able to heal them so that we'd all be one big happy family again. And instead, what was before me is that I had to heal. The thing that really clued me in is I had a spiritual experience in 1992. Steve was raised Jewish, and he wanted me to practice Judaism, so I converted. Then when I was going through these terrible nightmares, I decided to go back to my own church, but it was funny because I had to sneak out at night as if I was seeing a lover, because he was so adamant that I not have an association with the Christian church. So I couldn't have a Christmas tree, I couldn't have crucifixes. I mean, he was threatened, and I understand why, that, the Jews suffered a lot in the Holocaust, and many of them associate the Holocaust with Christianity, understandable. So this particular night, God had handpicked this night. I'm sitting, there's not that many people there in the church. It's Christ Episcopal Church on Main Street in Pittsford. And this stained glass window projects out in 3D at me. And it's a picture of this very stoic person. I could barely tell that it was a man or a woman because she had very masculine features. But she had on this beautiful teal gown covered with sunflowers. And she started talking to me. And light was streaming through her and illuminated where I was sitting. And I'm looking around thinking, I hope none of my patients are here. Oh, what's happening? And what she said to me is, Fidelis, Fidelis. And I'm thinking, Fidelis, how do I know that? Adeste Fidelis, oh, that's faith. And then I heard the words. And it was very odd because the words appeared to be coming from within me, but also from the window. And the words were, physician, heal thyself. And it was really odd. I didn't know what I was going into that night, obviously, but there was a guest priest from one of these towns around here where people race cars. I don't remember the name of the town, but Watkins Glen, thank you. And he was a guest priest from Watkins Glen, and of all things, he was a healing priest. He had a healing ministry, which was unusual in those years in the Episcopal Church. So I grabbed a receipt from the back of my purse, because he said, if any of you have healing gifts, see me after church. So I grabbed this old receipt, wrote my name and address on it, and nervously handed it to him at the end of the Mass, and ran out. Well, lo and behold, this was a Thursday. On Monday, I get a letter. Yes, we're very interested in working with you. Please see your priest. And I remember thinking, I don't have a priest, and I don't want my husband to know what's going on. So I ended up visiting the priest myself. And I asked him if he would baptize my children. And he said, well, I would have to speak to your husband about it. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, you're a couple, aren't you? I said, well, I don't want him to know. So he said, I'm sorry. He said, can I help you with your marriage, though? I said, I don't think so. So I did have the children baptized, and it made me feel really good. But Steve did find out. I can't remember if I left literature laying around or what happened, but he was furious. I mean, so furious. And you can understand why, because it's true that my real lover was God, even at that point, and that he had sort of opted out of the equation with all the stress that had happened. And my strong connection at that time wasn't with him. It was with God and the children. It wasn't even with myself, because I didn't equate getting to know God with getting to know myself. I was clinging to God for dear life at that point. What do I do? What do I do? Help me, help me. One of the things I noticed that night I went to church after so many years of not going is that when the crucifix went by, I felt so much shame. You know, it's common in the Catholic and Episcopal churches to genuflect when the cross goes by or to bow your head. And I remember bowing way too low. It's like I felt shame. And I remember thinking, why do I feel shame? I really have never done anything bad. But again, the wheels started turning. And I started to notice that I was having this tremendous heat coming out of my hands. And patients would comment on it. And then one day I'm blow drying my hair in the bathroom in the morning, and I hear this very loud, I am, coming out of my chest. So I said, Steve, come here, I want you to hear this. And so it went on, it kept bellowing, and he said, I don't hear a thing. Stop that, you're gonna hurt yourself. And I think he was probably right, especially from his perspective. I think at that point he had had enough with strange encounters of the close kind with Melanie. But so after I heard the I am, and it all kind of fell into place, I started studying with a healer, Dolores Krieger, and her partner at the time, who developed something called therapeutic touch. Dora Kunz was her partner, and Dora Kunz was a medium. But it was really interesting because Dolores Krieger was a nurse emeritus at Columbia, very well-respected nurse in her field, a research-oriented nurse. She was emphatic. Don't let anyone know this is spiritual. Don't even mention the word God when you're doing this on people, because we have to legitimize this. And there had actually been an article in the Journal of the American Medical Association while I was studying with her about how this is a bunch of garbage. And I remember thinking, I don't care what they say about it, this is real. Because at that point, so it was 93, I started to implement this into my practice. And patients loved it, it was very relaxing. They didn't know what the heck was happening, but I didn't know how to explain it either. But one of the things I noticed about the experience was I felt better when I would do the energy work. It just was so enlivening. And at that point, my marriage was falling apart, and I really felt that doing that was what was keeping me centered in God. Otherwise, I think I don't know what would have happened. So, and at that point, I started to get involved with Chopra and taught my kids to meditate because they were struggling with a divorce. And it really just empowered me to continue to figure out what I needed to do to heal myself and help my patients heal from things that people couldn't figure out. That became my passion. So I became known as the physician that people would go to when no one else could figure things out. And it was really an honor because I knew that the messages were coming directly from God. And I remember when I started implementing this a lot, it was around 1996 or so. And I had joined somebody else in practice at Highland Hospital who I was actually covering for a friend of mine. And so I joined Paul Cherkasky, and he said, I don't think I want you doing that spiritual stuff in the office. You might want to do it on your own. I said, no problem, no problem. But I remember I would cover his patients, and that year there was a drug that he was using pretty heavily in the practice, and I told him I don't want to use that drug. And he said, why not? And I said, well, shortly it's going to come out that it's really doing damage to people's hearts. They're going to take it off the market. And I remember he looked at me and started yelling. He said, these are my patients. You have to do what I want you to do. It was my very first experience where I had received negative feedback from my gifts from a colleague. And I understand he was overworked. And I decided to go off on my own. Opened up a solo practice. I had done that before. And really started using the energy work with patients and just, noticing fabulous results. And again, what I noticed in me is it would take some of the sadness away. I've never been a depressed person, but I had something called post-traumatic stress disorder, which is when I would have memories start coming back of the abuse, I would feel my body lock up, and I would go to different healers in town. And this is a wonderful healing community. And whenever they would work with me, I would release more of the stuff that would come up. So, I found it to be really helpful. And when I studied with Chopra and Vasant Lad, I started learning about Ayurveda and the chakra system, which I've renamed the gates of the body. Because I think it isn't just a wheel of energy, it's actually a gateway to heaven. Because when When I gave birth to my first child, Grace, at the age of 12, I had a spiritual experience at the time it was happening. And what happened was I witnessed my little 12-year-old giving birth. And I was surrounded by white light and was told that this looks like it's happening to you, but this isn't real. And you're going to become a physician, but you won't be a regular physician. You'll be teaching people about love. And, I was a really artistic kid. I was musical, loved to paint. I didn't like science and math at all. So I remember thinking after this whole thing was over, was that really real? Did that really happen? And it's a natural reaction for a child. With post-traumatic stress disorder, you stuff the information and then until you can deal with it later, whenever that is. And especially because there's no time and spirit, it doesn't matter when you deal with these things, really. It comes up when you're safe to work through them. Because everything, remember we said before, everything is about, with the body, is really about the soul. The mind is the process of experience. The body and soul are the experience. The experiencer is actually the Holy Spirit, or the whole Spirit of God. That experience that I had was experienced through my whole spirit, which is why I could witness it from the ceiling, not react to it, feel like I was completely fine and protected in the arms of God's light. And of course I was. Why didn't I bleed to death? My mother and father assisted me give birth in the ceramic bathtub of our little house at the time. Why didn't I bleed to death? They really didn't have proper medical training. My father was a dentist, but they don't deliver babies, thank goodness. And so what they did is after the delivery, they shipped me to my godfather's house in Los Angeles, who is a family physician, and was a wonderful man. And I remember bleeding into their mattress, and they never even said a thing. But why did I survive? I mean, it really brings up a question, doesn't it? And so, none of the emotions, none of the grief, nothing got dealt with. For me, like I said, I latched on to God's love for me, and that's what made me feel like I mattered in life. And what I noticed about me from the very beginning of my life is that people always felt better around me. So my identity was very much connected with, how can I make you feel better? How can I help you? Which is really the language of spirit. Our ego always says, what can I get out of this? Or what can you give me, right? The first gate is the gate of transformation in the body. The first gate, every immune disorder that exists happens at the first gate. It's at the first part of the fetal development, which is the base of the spine, right? So the first gate in our human bodies involves the adrenal glands, the kidneys, all your muscles, bones, joints, and ligaments, your autoimmune system, hypertension, arthritis. This is all what's involved in the first gate, or the first chakra. So whenever you're, for instance, dealing with hypertension, when somebody comes in to my office and tells me that, I'm seeing you because I want to get off my blood pressure medicines, or I need to have more effective treatment for my blood pressure, the first discussion I have with them is about the first gate. Because the first gate is really the gateway to healing for the entire body. And like I said, guess when the first gate is developed? It's developed between the ages of 0 and 3, the fetus to the 3-year-old, right? So if we have any type of trauma during those periods, for the rest of our lives, we deal with these issues, right? We deal with issues of musculoskeletal joint issues, hypertension, etc. There's so much hope in that statement, isn't there? Because you can say, if you have the knowledge of these 9 gates, you can say, wow, This is how I'm expanding my consciousness. This is how I'm coming to understand my soul. Isn't there hopelessness when you go to a doctor and say, my blood pressure won't get better, or my cancer keeps recurring, or this arthritis, do I really have to have a knee replacement? So the approach of a physician that's an integrative physician would be completely different than a traditional physician, because we want to impress upon you the importance of knowing your story. If you know your story, there's great power in healing. And what I mean by that is, you form the story as you listen to what your body is telling you. Remember I said the body is really precipitated soul, right? So if your body keeps coming up with the same set of symptoms, which our bodies tend to do, right? Arthritis is often chronic. Sore throats are often chronic. Eye disease, most people have some eye issue. These are all corresponding to a different gate in the body with a different set of information. The soul is actually the sum total of all of your experiences throughout life. That's what the soul is. And Carl Jung talked about that. He said, the famous psychiatrist, the soul and the subconscious are the same thing. So, and if you look at any of the work of Candace Pert, who's another person I studied with, a really brilliant molecular biologist, she wrote a book called The Molecules of Emotion. This is not even cutting edge anymore. This has been out for 20 years, right? We know it's unequivocal that when we're having symptoms in our body, molecules are developing to bring us more information and energy about what's happening. So we need to learn to understand the body and the soul so that we can heal. Because guess what, people? Physicians, nurses, anybody in the healthcare field are overloaded right now, right? And when you have your 5 minutes with your doctor and they're on a computer typing away, trying to keep up with regulations, how common do you think it would be that you'd be able to tell your story to the physician in 5 minutes? I never did. My physician did not know my story. Here we had practiced across the hall and helped each other with a bunch of stuff. He didn't know my story till last year. And imagine that. I'm 57 years old. I had been going to him for 20 years. Never knew my story. Now, obviously, whatever your story is, and we all have a story, you want to pick somebody that you feel safe with to tell your story to, whatever it is, right? Because most of us are private. I know I'm a very private person. This is so out of the box for me to be telling you my story, really. But the reason why I'm doing it is I really feel so passionate that once you have somebody witness your story, it opens you to a deeper and deeper healing. I think there's 5 stages of the art of self-healing. I think the first is to ask questions of your body, your mind, and your soul. A simple question goes, why is this happening? What is happening? Start with yourself. Ask these questions in meditation and prayer. We call that intention. And we're going to do a meditation later together and set an intention for your own healing. But asking the question is the beginning. After that, it requires a belief that you're going to get an answer, doesn't it? Because it's comforting to know that if you ask, someone is going to answer, right? But guess who that someone is? Guess who has the most answers for your health? Anybody? Yourself. That's right. You know, I can't tell you the number of times I've had patients come in and say, this doctor, blah, 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 and didn't diagnose this and la, la, la. And I understand the frustration, but ultimately the responsibility of our healing lies with us. Because nobody knows us like we know us. And if we don't know us, then it's time to, right? Because aren't we always unfolding? You know, we're learning things about ourselves all the time that we didn't even know were there. So it's really powerful to get tuned into your story. and to let yourself be present. Have you heard that term, be present? Right? So it's often not that easy to be present because we're living in a culture, especially right now, that's super chaotic, right? And so many things are taking our attention away from us, even within our own families. You know, spouses, partners, children, careers, everything gets in the way potentially of our self-knowledge. But what I've come to know through my own life experience is the most important relationship is your relationship with yourself. Remember I said in the beginning, the art of self-healing is all about relationship. And that relationship begins with you. When I told my parents that I didn't want to have contact with them until they had a deeper healing, and because I needed to protect my children, I said to my father, who, like I said, had been silent, Dad, love yourself. Love yourself. Because only if you love yourself will you ever be able to love another. And he broke down and wept, and I felt a certain relief with that, because that's a sign of surrender, isn't it? When we cry, that's the third step of the art of self-healing, in my experience. When we surrender, when we let go, that is the beginning of a potentially tremendous healing. We bring ourselves front and center again. Instead of allowing our emotions to be buried, our feelings to be buried, we awaken to a deeper reality of what's happening. And you've heard the expression, let go and let God. That can be really hard to do, right? Because we're socialized as human beings to listen to the ego. Somebody did some study, I have no idea how they did it, but apparently we have something like 60,000 thoughts a day, and of those 60,000, the same 20 keep repeating themselves, and they're usually garbage thoughts. And there was this brilliant psychiatrist, David, I always forget his last name, he died recently, he was a psychiatrist at Cornell, and he wrote a book called The Eye of the One. It's a really fascinating book, and he calibrated the population, the 7 billion population of the world, as to what was the most common frequency that people vibrated at. And he said that less than 0.1% of the world's population resonated to love. Most people resonate to fear, right? So in any one community, you may have just a few people that have done an expansion of their consciousness, done the work, so to speak, right? So that's why I'm saying don't look to somebody else to help you awaken. That power to awaken is within you. Remember we said the experiencer is your spirit. That's the real you. The real you is not your body. I suppose you could say it is because the mind, body, and spirit are one. But the ego often rules the body, right? Like I said, those 60,000 thoughts are pretty persistent, you know, and they say things like, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're too stupid. You know, they're usually very negative thoughts. So we learn to shut down our emotions when we hear those 60,000 thoughts roaring through. But there's a quiet voice within us. I call it the still small voice, like so many others do. And it's that voice that was speaking to me all those years until I remembered my truth. And of course, truth it's an expansion of your own consciousness. Everybody has their own truth that they need to discover. No one can really tell you your truth, right? So the first gate is really about opening to your awareness. Knowing that you have this power to be aware is really incredible. And you can understand, you know, over the years I've taught my patients to meditate. I've really taught all of them to meditate that come to me. And I notice that people are very comfortable doing it in the room. But when they return, they often, you know, are very frank and say, I can't do this on my own. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that it's easier to meditate with somebody else? Because we're going to do a group meditation in a minute. Because when you're alone with yourself, what happens, Sandy?
You don't think. You don't have the thoughts coming in your mind when you're hearing somebody guide you through meditation. When you're doing that on your own, it's flooding in and it's hard to get it out of there.
It's true. So when you first begin to meditate, just out of curiosity, how many people here are meditators? Okay. Awesome. So you can start at any time. It's never too late. It's not hard. It's actually so comforting. But what happens when you first begin to meditate is the initial layers begin to peel away. So you may notice discomfort in your body. And when you do, you just return your attention back to your breath. You might notice that you fall asleep. Again, that's fine. You obviously needed sleep. Sleep. You might notice that you develop a disturbance, right? Kind of like I did, where nightmares start or something like that happens. But again, that's a purification. That's a cleansing of your subconscious. All dreams are really a working out of the subconscious. So in meditation, the distinction between meditation and prayer, if there really is a distinction, is meditation is listening to God, and prayer is talking to God. And if you're uncomfortable with the word God because of different experiences you've had with religion, then just use the word love or spirit. Whatever makes you comfortable to develop this dynamic relationship between yourself and yourself. And that's really what it is. It's like this book I was telling you about, The Eye of the One. Who is the one? It's the one in you. It's the I am presence. It's the one that was bellowing out of my chest, and I got the giggles when it came out, even though I had never experienced anything like that before. Do you know that I actually saw a patient? She was a young lawyer, and she said, Dr. Kates, I'm really scared. I'm going crazy. I said, what's the matter? She said, I hear this whisper, I am, coming out of my chest. I said, oh, don't worry about that. That happened to me years ago. You'll be fine. So, some people don't have these types of experiences. That doesn't mean you're less spiritual, right? Everybody in this room is spiritual. You're spirit first, right? Nobody, in the language of spirit, nobody is better than anyone else. Nobody is ahead of anybody else spiritually. How could you be ahead of somebody else? It's your spirit, right? So if you're intimidated by the idea of meditation, read a book about it. Get a tape. It's the best advice I could give you as a physician, far better than any prescription I could write you for pain medication or blood pressure medicine. Please learn to meditate. And seek group meditations. They're all over Rochester. And as far as religious practice goes, I think, I like the word religion is from the Latin religio, which means to stitch back to God, right? Isn't that beautiful? And I think a lot of churches and synagogues and mosques have gotten away from that concept. It's, it's a group of people. It's a social gathering of people. And people are people. So a lot of times we associate experiences we may have had at church with a priest or a minister or something. We put a negative spin on it because, we're having issues with somebody's personality. It's so important to revisit your spiritual practice, especially in times of chaos like this, where all of the structures are breaking down so the new paradigms, the new structures can be built. We need to have that anchor with God. God is our life. God is our mother and father. In fact, when the first gate is imbalanced, we are all victims. When the first gate is balanced, we recognize that we are all children of God. Right? I read an article recently. This was in Northern California in one of the papers. It's, when will we stop being children of God and becoming adults of God? And I remember thinking, oh, please. I like the concept of being God's lamb, right? And just being held. That's how I felt when I was giving birth. I felt like I was being held in the arms of love. And you want to know what? It has driven me my entire life. I wanted to recreate that experience my entire life. I felt, despite the pain of what had gone on, what a beautiful juxtaposition to also have the most joyful day of my life be next to the saddest day of my life, you know? And so it shows you that we have the power to shift our belief and our thinking in every moment. If you catch yourself being down on yourself, who's going to stop that? We have to, right? No matter how many times a friend, a partner, a colleague says, you know, you're really down on yourself. If there's a tape that's running from a past experience that says you don't matter, you're worthless, then how effective is it going to be to just say, stop that already? No, it doesn't really work. That's why it's really important. I love the counselors in this community. They're a really dedicated group of people. I did 10 years of counseling. I really don't think it helped me at all. As a matter of fact, the counselors would always tell me, I went to 3 different ones, Melanie, there's nothing wrong with you. Well, I wasn't there because I wanted to hear there was something wrong with me. I wanted somebody to partner with me in my healing, right? We wound in relationship and we heal in relationship. So if you're struggling with something, develop a relationship with somebody that you trust and go back again until you're able to establish that close relationship with yourself, right? And even then, I mean, I can tell you, preparing for this conference, I saw a friend of mine last night to help me process some more stuff that had come up. And when I was a little girl, my father would say to me when he was abusing me, if you ever tell anyone, I'm going to kill you. Well, I hadn't had sleep for 5 days. I had this homeless person in California wake me up at 3:30 in the morning for the last 4 months, and he was really rankling those garbage cans the last 4 or 5 days, and then I flew here and didn't get sleep, and then I'm sleeping in a strange bed, and I don't have insomnia. So I knew something was coming up. And as soon as I moved back to California, 3 hours from my parents' home, doesn't it make sense that my PTSD would have been activated? And I started to get that feeling again. And I know when it's coming on, and I know when I need help, and I know who to go to. That's what you need to do. You need to find somebody that you're safe with, that you can go to, that'll affirm and reground you into love. Because love is the healer, isn't it? Medicine is helpful. Love is the healer. From the beginning, I shared with you, I don't care for medicine. It's pretty interesting philosophy for somebody that's been a physician for 30 years, but I find that it's a blessing that I'm not that fond of medicine, because although medicines are incredibly powerful in healing and I prescribe them, there is no medicine like the inner physician. One of the first books I read after my experience of losing my first child was Albert Schweitzer's Out of My Life and Thought. I don't think it's a typical book a 12-year-old reads, but he was, I think, an Austrian physician, worked in the jungles of Africa and was deeply, deeply connected to God. And he was an inspiration for me. I thought, oh, maybe I can be like him. So, you want to pick your hero. And who is your hero? It's you. You're your hero. So anything that you're struggling with that you think you might not be able to get through, you can. You can get through it. And as I said, remember something really simple. Remember I said there were 5 steps? Ask, believe, surrender. The 4th one is witness. Find someone you trust that you can witness your story to. When you do that, your heart opens up. You finally understand what the first gate is all about, which is, I matter. Remember I said the voice of dysfunction in the first gate is, I don't matter. I'm a victim. The child of God is able to say, I matter, I'm loved. Because what makes us matter? Love. And if we feel that we don't matter to someone, You matter to someone. That was very healing for me. To become a physician, God knew what I needed. He knew that I needed to spend my whole life helping others heal. Because that's what's healed me. You healed me. So it's just been a pleasure to speak to you. And I want to answer your questions. The last step, what do you think the last step is? Ask, believe, surrender.
Enjoy.
That's a good one. Receive. Receive. Time to receive. What can I help you with? I want to have some questions, and then I actually want to end with a meditation. Right? So it was really interesting because for the last many years, I heard whenever I meditated, you're going to be moving back to California. Oh my gosh, did I ever resist it? I'd lived here 27 years. I had a beautiful home in Pittsford. My children were anchored here. But the thing that really made me do it is my son 2 years ago had moved to Salt Lake City, Utah to finish college. And he became an alcoholic, he and his girlfriend. And he had 3 DUIs. And Spirit told me, God told me, he is going to be jailed. You need to move. You need to move out west. So this was the day before he called me and said, Mom, I'm so ashamed. I got my 3rd DUI. I'm going to go to jail for 2 years. And I said, honey, I'm so proud of you for telling me. And I said, I believe that God is healing you right now because you're able to surrender and tell me. And I do not believe you will go to jail for 2 years. In fact, it's possible you won't go to jail at all. But even if you do, we're here. And I didn't want to tell him I was going to move because he just loves this area. And, you know, it's my children's home. So now get this. You know how the housing market has been, right? It's improving, but it still wasn't great in December. So I saw a realtor. She said, well, this is a beautiful house. I don't think it'll take long to sell, but you need to do this, this, and this. So I had all this work done in the house, and there wasn't that much to do because we had taken care of it, but it sold in 2 days. God was talking to me. So, yeah, so I moved back, and as soon as I moved back, which was on Mother's Day, my daughter graduated from college May 11th, May 12th, I moved back. We drove across the country. I started having insomnia. No big surprise, right? But what was really wonderful was it was a homeless man waking me up. And I said, you know, when you're following Spirit, everything's a sign, right? Because everything's God. God is energy. God is love. Okay, God, what are you trying to tell me? Why is a homeless man, I paid a lot of money for this apartment, why do I have a homeless man every morning at 3:30 in the morning waking me up? I asked. I got my answer. Because you're homeless, right? That doesn't feel like home yet. Home is certainly not 3 hours away, right? But I still have hope that my mother will awaken. When you love someone, don't you want them to be loved? She has never been able to receive love from me. I think that has been one of the major heartbreaks of my life. Because she didn't do it. It wasn't her. It was her fear that did it. And just like my father, it was his fear. And just to give you a little information, the Armenian people suffered a 1.5 million loss of their population between the end of the 1800s until 1923. My parents were born in 1925 and 1926. They were the youngest in their family. Their parents had been born there. They had seen terrible things. My parents, of course, didn't know anything about it. It was Depression era. They were survivors. I really truly believe they did the best they could. And for themselves, they were tremendous success. My father became a multimillionaire. He owned all this property. My mother was a beautiful woman. She was involved in every aspect of society, the symphony, junior league. You know, for her generation, she had reached the pinnacle. And so had my father. But of course, we know that they suffered terribly. And me along with it. But I think what really broke me, to be honest, I think my rock bottom was when my son was jailed. And he just got out of jail on Sunday. And it was so hard because I believe that he became an alcoholic because I projected my fear of my father onto him. So that's why I say, heal your stuff so you don't project it onto your kids. Because it's so hard to watch your kids suffer. I mean, I know with God I can handle anything. Grant always said to me, Mom, you're my connection to God. I said, no, Grant, I'm not living with you anymore. You have to get to know God. So guess what happened? On Sunday, I arrived here on Friday night at midnight. My friends came and picked me up. I was still really agitated about him being in jail and just praying the whole time. There's this beautiful Catholic church I go to in Petaluma. And I go every day. The doors are always open. I light my candles. I pray in front of Mary. I pray in front of Joseph. By the way, Mary and Joseph were my parents. I decided that my parents really weren't my parents. So I talked to statues my whole life. And I still do. So, and they talk back. So I was just assured by Mary and assured by Joseph that Grant was safe and that he was going to have a spiritual awakening in jail. Well, guess what he told me? I got a text at 5 o'clock in the morning. Mom, I'm out. Call me when you can. So I called him. I said, Grant, how was jail? Silence. Silence. Mom, really powerful, deep voice. Mom, it was enlightening. He said, Mom, it was just like you told me it would be. I said, how so, Grant? He said, Mom, I heal people. He recognized his power. Grant is very similar to me. He is naturally connected to God. I took him to see the so-called Hugging Saint Amma when he was 12 years old, and he had a spiritual experience right in front of me, and it scared the heck out of him. He turned ghost white. But I knew that he had the same special gifts I do, and my daughter does too. And he's shut them down, because what does our society do, especially with young men? We shut down their gifts, right? So I kept trying to nurture them. At 4 and 6, I taught them to do TM, or primordial sound meditation, which is Deepak Chopra's version of TM. And he didn't really stick with it. And this tape that was playing into his head was, after we divorced, my former husband quickly remarried. And he married a woman that I think felt very, very threatened. I think in a lot of second marriages, that's the case. And I wasn't threatened by her. In fact, I felt that it would be really important to have a good relationship with her. But she wasn't comfortable raising Asian children. I think they were ashamed of it. And I honestly think that Steve was too. It was just too out of the box for him. And so he made the decision to not be in the children's life in '99. And that really broke my kid's heart. So all these years, Grant said to me on the phone, Mom, all these years I felt like I didn't matter except when I was with you. And he said, the minute I left home, I turned to the bottle because I kept feeling so worthless. You know, and they're adopted from Korea. Adopted children have a first gate injury, right? So the fact that he could say to me with such courage, I felt worthless, I felt ashamed, but in jail I found a purpose. I was with sexual offenders. I was with meth addicts. I was with heroin addicts. Mom, they all kept coming to me for help, for counsel, for fellowship. What more can I say? God did the job again. I didn't have to do anything. I couldn't. I really couldn't. Felt totally powerless. So, yeah. Hi, Heidi.
In California, do you have someone or a group that can bring you to the process that you can ask, you can believe, you can surrender, witness, and see?
So get this. This is an amazing story. Thanks for asking that. I started doing spiritual classes in Rochester about 20 years ago. one of my first students had lost her job at Kodak, and about 3 years ago. And she combed the country looking for a job. Brilliant woman, mechanical engineer and a MBA from Simon School. Couldn't get a job. And she had it in her mind she wanted to be on the East Coast. And I said, Martha, I said, you really have so many gifts. I said, have you thought of checking out the West Coast? Well, where would I go? And I said, how about Northern California? In your particular field, there's a ton of jobs. The following day, she got a interesting letter from a recruiter on LinkedIn. We have a job in your field in Petaluma, California. Now, I had heard from God in 2009 when I was getting my fellowship from the American College of Physicians. I'm wandering down a hallway. I'm dating this guy that I'm very in love with, and we're talking about, possibly being together. And I just hear, you're going to be moving to Petaluma, California. I'm thinking, interesting. So I really tuned into what I wanted to do with this relationship, and the answer was clear to me that this wasn't going to be the relationship I wanted to spend the rest of my life in. And I ended up breaking up with him that weekend and walking out of there with more than another degree, a new life plan. And it just came to me. And that's what happens when you have a relationship with God. There's a lot of uncertainty, but there's wisdom cloaked in all that uncertainty. So she moved there, and I told her after she moved, some months after, I said, I'm moving there. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, that's what God told me to do. I had never even heard of Petaluma. My father's family is from San Francisco, which is 45 minutes north of San Francisco, and I had never heard of Petaluma, but I just heard that and I Googled it. I got an apartment online without ever seeing it. I just knew I was meant to be there. It's perfect. It's the perfect community for me. It's a small dairy town, beautiful, very strong spiritual community. I walk everywhere. I don't have to drive unless I want to. The closest mall is 30 minutes away. It's a totally different lifestyle, and it's perfect for me. I'm writing out there, which I love to do, and beginning to teach. But this will always be the place where I practice, hopefully, and I appreciate you so much. But yeah, does that answer your question? Heidi, that's my spiritual community, the church I'm going to. Because we need to know that we're connected to the creative power. And that's how we do it, right? We're human beings. We're always overthinking, trying to analyze. But when things like that happen, oh my gosh, God is hearing me. He's showing me He's there, right? And by the way, Grace and Luke, my son that died from the miscarriage after the tumor was removed, they come to me all the time. And it's really interesting because they say that when you lose a child in infancy, they continue to grow on the other side till they're 33 years old. Luke comes back looking just like a child of his age would. And Grace, of course, is grown, and she looks like a 33-year-old woman. She looks like me with blonde hair. So, which is why I dyed my hair blonde. If you're wondering, you look different, Dr. Kates. This is my natural color. But yeah, so yes, they continue to communicate with me. Okay, let's do a meditation. You guys ready for it after all that? So just get comfortable in your chairs if you would. Uncross your legs. And feel your body against the chair. Close your eyes if you would, and allow yourself to relax. Take a couple of slow, deep breaths. And tune into your heart. And imagine that you see the golden flame of life burning in the center of your heart. And now expand that golden flame to fill your entire heart and your entire body. And see this energy go beyond your body now to fill this entire room. And then see your energy move beyond this room to this whole community. And then see your golden flame of life encompassing the whole planet, all of Mother Earth. Take a deep breath again, and then draw that energy back into your body. And move it through, all the way through your body. That golden light moving like a river into your neck and shoulders, out your arms and hands into the earth. And moving in through the crown of your head and straight through all of your organs, out your legs and feet into the earth. So that you have these golden roots of light anchoring you to the earth. You're connected to Mother God. You are connected to Father God. I'd like you to set an intention for your own healing now. Ask for what you really, really want. Allow the thoughts to move in and out. Any distractions that come, just return your attention to your breath. That intention is information and energy. Send it deep into your heart and allow it to flow from your heart through your arms and hands back into the earth. Empty your hands and empty your heart of any burdens that you might be carrying. And allow the seed of your intention to be planted deep in the earth by the river of your soul. Trusting that it's now been planted, your intention will grow and be nourished in the coming weeks, months, and years of your life. Allow yourself to continue to ask, believe, surrender, witness, and receive the truth of who you really are. You are here to be love. You are God's creation. You are here to be that creation. And to be well, always in all ways. Receive yourself. Love yourself. And then love your neighbor. So take another deep breath and return your attention back into your body. And when you're ready, slowly open your eyes. So do you have any other questions? Yeah.
So you're going to be coming back periodically?
So thank you. Thank you for asking. So what Spirit gave me, because I really didn't have plans when I left her about what I was going to do, but I have been guided to do a seminar series based on the book that I'm writing, that's being edited right now. And every 3 months, I'm going to come back and give you the next chapter. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. You know, I've never really worried about money. I've always felt that God's provided. But as I see my bank account dwindle, I keep asking God, what do you want me to do? Really interesting. So I set up a practice there. I was guided. It's a beautiful space. I have one patient. And guess what? That one patient's from Rochester. So I don't know what God's plans are. I'm open. But I come back here to see patients every 3 months.
So are you
So.
booked now?
I have a few open spots. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really been a long